All right, welcome to the first Shippable podcast. My name is Matt Carter, and today I'm joined by Dr. Nicole Forsgren from Chef Software. Nicole is also the author, along with Gene Kim and Jez Humble, of the 2016 State of DevOps report. So I wanted to talk to her a little bit about, what are some of the findings and the trends that she's seeing in DevOps today, and just kind of what's the state of the industry and some of the comments there. And then also just to see, what's going on broadly beyond the technology to what's happening with the culture of DevOps, and how are the companies really taking this challenge and moving forward with this. So first of all, thank you for joining us, Nicole. I'd love it if you could just take a few minutes and kind of talk about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So that was a lot. First of all, thanks for having me on. So my background is I started as a software engineer at IBM, and then I kind of transitioned into working on some of their hardware products, and along the way I ended up supporting a lot of those systems I was working on. I also did some consulting work, which again, you end up supporting all those systems you work on. So I was a sysadmin for a while there. And then I ended up going to grad school and doing some research, working on a PhD. Along the way, I kind of stumbled into some work and some research work with sysadmins, and realized that most of the industry was treating sysadmins as regular users, or just not studying them, not treating a lot of our fundamental technology professionals as different and special, or worthy of study and investigation. They were thinking of them like regular users, when really these people are working in, we were all working in complex adaptive systems that were high risk, highly complex. It was really difficult work. And so, I shifted a lot of my research and dissertation work to study this environment, this context, these people, how they do their work, and what is predictive of success in this area. And so that was a lot of my background. At that point, I shifted into academia. So I was a tenure track professor for a while, which, the dirty little secret there is that we do some teaching, but really what we do is research. And so a bunch of that work really looked like consulting, because I wanted to make sure that work was really grounded in what was important and relevant in the industry. And then just, couched in peer review. Anonymous, most of it was anonymous data in peer review. There were a handful of places that let me publish publicly, like NASA. And then about a year and a half ago, I was able to come to Chef to work on some projects. A few years ago, one of those kind of consulting projects or really interesting data research projects was with Puppet. So I bumped into the crew at Puppet and said, I'm really interested in some of the work that you're doing, and you're looking at, a lot of the ways that sysadmins and developers do their work. So let me know if you want some help doing some data analysis. And then I kind of like wedged my way into a lot of what they were doing there. And that was how I met Gene Kim and Jez Humble. Was the first year, I believe it was the 2013 report. I just did some analysis on the very, very back end, because I realized that the way they were collecting their data it really didn't make itself amenable to the types of analysis I wanted to do. It was just a regular marketing report data collection. And so the next year, starting in 2014, I sort of inserted myself fully, invited myself to their party, and really, jumped in. And starting in 2014, we have a fully rigorous research design appropriate for academic peer review, and we actually do have academic peer review papers off of the data set from 2014 onwards. So the last 3 years have been fully rigorous research reports.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about, getting not treating the sysadmins like the normal people. You mentioned normal users. I think a lot of time, really sysadmins and developers are kind of been seen as the guys back in the office, and you kind of don't want to see them like on the Ed Squad or something. So as you've moved into taking this kind of studied space and really innovating around what turns into DevOps now before it even came to be. Tell me about the genesis of the State of DevOps report. So what were really the 3 or 4 big questions you're looking to answer as you jumped into this with Gene and Jez?
So the report, had already started. Alana Brown at Puppet Labs kind of had this, great idea that people needed to at least kind of understand the basics of what was happening. So basic ideas about, what size of infrastructure was happening, what does IT performance look like, was already out there. By the time I came around, I really wanted us to be able to understand from a really solid metric and psychometric point of view, how do we measure the space? How do we define the space? What does this look like? And then we added a few more constructs. And so in 2014, what we did is we really wanted to define very clearly, what is IT performance, and is this a solid measure? And so in 2014, our key takeaways, one was, what's a measure of IT performance, and is this a solid measure in the context of software development and delivery? And that was one solid takeaway. And IT performance for us, and really this has kind of become standard across the industry, is, or at least one way to talk about it is, this is both throughput and stability, and they go together for teams that are doing software development and delivery well. And this was really important because for years, ITIL has said, or at least strongly implied, that throughput and stability don't go together, that you have to make trade-offs in some way, that in order to get stability, you have to slow down. And so we defined it as both, because throughput really is kind of the developer's game, stability was the operations game, and that we had heard stories from the likes of Flickr and Etsy and Netflix, the awesome unicorns, that you can have both. So we found a measure that worked, that let us measure that, and we did find evidence in the data that the two do move together. So we do find a good measure of that. That was the first really exciting finding. Another exciting finding was that several of the things that we find in the DevOps space, that you do need technology, you need process, and you need culture, are actually predictive of IT performance. So that was also really exciting. We had strong correlations. We had suggestions of prediction as well. Another thing that was really, really exciting in 2014 was that also IT performance is predictive of organizational performance. I really wanted to throw that measure in. So Gene and Jez and the Puppet team were like, well, yeah, of course, we've been thinking this for years, but as an academic, we had decades of research showing that investments in IT did not show up in the bottom line. So this was a little bit of a stretch for me. I was like, let's throw the measures in, let's see if it works. It absolutely did. This has now been backed in findings and research out of MIT, several other places. So that was a huge finding. It's been really exciting. This has also shown up in peer review. So that was exciting. The last one that I really like is a good cultural measure that is especially applicable to technology environments. This was based on research by a sociologist named Ron Westrom, who developed an organizational typology that was really based out of healthcare and aviation. And other contexts that are high risk, that are complex, that are predictive of outcomes and performance, where information flow is very important, and that, interestingly enough, tell us what happens when things go wrong. So this is perfect for technology, right? A piece of my dissertation argued that these contexts are good places to look to see what happens in technology. And so we adapted this model to develop new measures for culture. And for 3 years in a row, we found it to be predictive of both IT performance and organizational performance. And it's really great because we know people matter. We know culture is important. Socio-technical research has shown us for years that this is a really great place to look. So we've got a great 6-item scale. You can look at 6 questions. It shows up in the report. We share it with everyone. The DevOps Enterprise Forum actually came out with a guidance white paper in metrics last year as well. So you can Google that also. Or I can email it to you. You can put it in the notes. So people can use like this quick 6-item measure. They can measure their teams. I have a lot of people using it quarterly or twice a year to see how their teams are doing. So team health is great to measure as well.
Yeah, and so in looking at the 2016 study, again, break it down into those different categories, I think is really important to be able to actually attack the problem in those bite-sized chunks. What are some of the key findings specifically that you've seen out of the 2016 report with regards to technology or technology adoption that you think IT managers or developer leads should be aware of as they're looking at getting this high-performing team in place in their own company?
So what we did, if it's okay, I'll take it back maybe one more step. So 2014 suggested that technology was important, management processes were important, and culture was important. So 2015 took it a step further and said, we think continuous delivery practices are important. We validated that. We found evidence for that and we broke it down. We found evidence for lean management practices as well. So 2016, we took it one step further and we expanded the definition and the scope of what continuous delivery might encompass. And so what we did is, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to cheat just a little bit and I'm going to pull up the report. In 2015, we included things like automated testing, automated testing, deployment automation. We included continuous integration, and we included version control. So in 2016, we expanded that to include test data management, trunk-based development, and incorporating security early in the process. Because for years, those last 2 points, surprisingly enough, which is so funny because Jez always jokes about this, right? Especially trunk-based development, Shippable, continuous delivery, right? They're always like, trunk-based development doesn't work, right? A mono repo just doesn't work. Or it only works for small teams. It's never going to work for our team. Google does this, right? Google has like a couple branches. They have a branch for Chrome, right? All of Chrome and like one other product, but Google works off of Trunk. So we wanted to finally test this. We wanted to see if there's evidence for this being a predictive indicator of IT performance. Again, where IT performance is both throughput and stability. So we find evidence for that. We also wanted to test security because security, for years, security has been something that happens at the end, right? We do pen testing. It's really nice, but like we find it so late, you just can't do anything about it. So what happens if you shift left on security? In theory, it's great, but everyone also always says, I can't do it. It slows everything down. So what happens if we shift left on security? Can I actually, include everything? And what does it look like if I shift left on security? So it turns out that including security early in the process, having security infosec involved in the design decisions, having pre-approved libraries that come from security, those types of things are predictive of IT performance. So that was really important as well. When we moved on to the lean management practices, so last year we included things like including WIP limits, which is great because that's actually a leading indicator. Visualization of work to make business decisions, those types of things. This year we went even farther up the value, farther up the string, right? We kind of went to the fuzzy front end. So we included things like visualization of the whole value stream, right? Does that help people? Because in theory, like that helps, right? We see it in other industries. Does this hold for tech? And collecting, integrating, and then embedding input from customers. So that as a developer, when I'm coding things into practice, do I know where it came from? Do I understand that it came from customers? Do I see it go into the process? Is it broadcast throughout the organization? And both of those are in fact predictive. Oh, and also the decomposition of work into smaller pieces. Because again, trunk-based development is really difficult to do if you can't code up something that can be developed within a week.
Yeah. The agility now and just everything moving faster and faster has just been absolutely amazing. So as much as like technology is a big driver of agility, the one thing I really find valuable from the report is that you really go into depth looking at what are the cultural changes that are required for an organization to achieve this highest level of productivity, and that's a place where personally I think culture change is actually quite a bit more difficult than technology changes. When you look at the culture of these organizations, what are some of the traits that you found of sort of the highest performing organizations? And what were some of the practices that you distilled from this that you could recommend to people looking to really instill this culture change along with the technology changes?
So the culture change really kind of needs to happen everywhere, right? So it needs to flow from the top. You need to have support from the top, but you also need to actually see it everywhere, right? You need to see it at the bottom. So a lot of these you can see in the Western model. So failure leads to inquiry, right? It needs to be safe. You need to be safe to make mistakes. Not that you need to be making like egregious, awful mistakes all the time, but if you take a calculated risk, then this needs to be okay to do, right? You need to be not covering it up. You need to be able to say, I did this and here's why. It was a wise decision, but this is what happened. What can we all learn from it, right? That needs to be okay to do. You need to have an experiment of learning, an environment of experimental learning, an environment of fast feedback, an environment that allows for and a climate for learning, right? So that, and we found that in one of the early studies, I believe that was 2014, where learning is seen as an investment and not a cost, so that you do have time to, some of the best companies have 20% time, so that you're not always putting out fires, so that you have time to go through and release and deal with that technical debt. and you have time for new features, and you have time for your head to just think. You can think, you can grow, you can work on your own pet project that's going to help the company, because that's what gives you space to be creative and do interesting new things. And so an environment that allows you to do that and think and speak across boundaries and implement novel ideas and novel things, and have metrics, implement things that are data driven. There's a great quote out of Greg Linden at Amazon that where he talks about how if you can grow a culture where any idea can be tested and will be given an opportunity for a chance to be considered, whether it's from the CTO or an intern, as long as there's some kind of data to support it, then it can be considered.
That's being able to measure the intangibles, one of the big challenges there. But I think that as you start seeing putting some of these experiments into practice and being able to say, yeah, you know what, we knew what we wanted to do up front and we didn't hit it, you can at least move on to the next thing.
Right. And I think I would even say that that's even like the biggest challenge that I would issue to some leadership. Right. There are so many times that you go in and the joke is like, who makes decisions? It's quite often it's the hippo, the highest paid person in the organization, right? Highest paid hippo, HIPPO. Find a way to encourage ideas from every level and encourage that feedback. Let someone say that it's a stupid idea or a bad, maybe not the word stupid, right? Or let them ask, is this a good idea? I'm not sure this is a good idea. Give the executive the opportunity to explain why it's a good idea, because it might not be, or it might not have been articulated clearly enough. Because then you'll have the developers understanding why it should be built.
Yeah, and developers usually aren't shy with their personality, which is one of the benefits of that kind of an organization. Another thing on culture here, and this is one I think is, I really love to get your feedback on this, is that one of the findings in your study was that right now there's a really acute lack of diversity in IT organizations. I think it was 92% of the respondents in your organization, the DevOps teams were made up of men. So, or
at least identified as male, right? We had 6% male reported as self-identified as female, right?
So that's, when I think about this, and also I think about, what your background is, I'd love to, get your thoughts on, what do organizations do to start driving diversity? Because I know that, again, you've had to face this yourself going through your career. What would be some of the things that you'd like to see implemented by companies? What can people start doing today so that you can really start attracting and retaining a more diverse group of people to be really reflective of, who your customers are and where the world's going?
This is such a long list, right? And I wish I could remember right now who said this. I think it was BearOps. I think it was Catherine Daniels. She had a really great blog post about this, but I love that, one of her things she said is try to come up with an answer that doesn't include the word pipeline. The pipeline is really important, but the pipeline is going to be drastically delayed. So don't ignore the pipeline. But right now, think of an answer for your own company, your own team that does not include the word pipeline. Because that is something that you can impact now. So what can you do? So you can do things like encourage diversity in your own teams, encourage women to speak up in meetings, keep track of who is speaking in meetings right now. Just keep track, because many times you may notice that the women just aren't speaking, because many times we don't. I'm loud, so I'll talk all the time, but not all women do. And it's interesting because I actually had a manager. Hi, Dave Olson. He was my manager at Utah State, and one time he was like, "You interrupt," and I know it's because you're passionate. You just care so much. And so I was helping him. I was pulling some information on how to be a good male ally, because we just did not have very many women in our program at Utah State. Again, Utah, right? there were so many cultural overlaps there. That Venn diagram was crazy. But I came across this crazy one that said, men who are successful in technology tend to interrupt other men. Women who are successful in technology interrupt everybody. And I sent it to him. I'm like, I'm sorry. Here's why I made it at IBM, right? There's this thing. I just talk over people. I try really, really hard not to. I've spent well over a decade asking people to tell me to stop. So pay attention in meetings. Moral of that story. Pay attention in meetings who's speaking. Some companies do a round robin around the table. Some companies at the end of the meeting, some organizations will ask every single person in the room if they're happy. Are you happy? I am happy. I am happy. I am happy. You can do that. You can, if you have any kind of internal events, make sure that you have strong representation or maybe even equal representation of women speakers. Make it happen. And I know that so many times people will say, we do blind reviews. Yes, but there's also a thing where you can put out a CFP and women just don't submit. There's a known thing where, like, if you put a job posting or a CFP, women self-assess, and we do not submit for a job or a CFP or anything unless we hit 90 to 100% of the qualifications, and men tend to submit at a 30 to 50% range. So, like, you aren't going to get the submissions from women. Very carefully write your job descriptions and have those screened very, very carefully. There are services that allow for that. I believe there's even an open source one. So if you use the word pipeline, do things like support internship programs, support any kind of diversity initiatives. You can do diversity scholarships. You can bring in, you can go as far down as you want with STEM initiatives. It's a challenging problem that covers several socioeconomic things, and that's just women, right? And then you get into intersectionality, which is a whole other thing that I try to be very sensitive to, but to be frank, I can't really speak to, right? I'm super white. So, but I support them as best I can.
Yeah, I think it's just being deliberate is important. It all starts with being mindful of the fact that, it is about, your customer base is reflective of everybody now. Technology is not limited to a specific, geography or segment. It's really everyone. So that's,
yes.
If you don't do that, you're going to miss out on opportunities.
Well,
one last thing here, just as we're wrapping up. So you've talked about kind of the evolution of the study from 2014 to 2015 to 2016. If you put on your crystal ball right now, what do you think are going to be the big trends that you're going to be reporting on in your 2017 report?
There are so many places there. So in some ways in technology, I would like to continue looking upstream and up the stack, possibly into architecture a little bit, although I'm not sure if that's going to get too specific for the state of DevOps study. I may try to branch out and break off into a separate study as well. I think security and compliance are going to continue being hot topics and possibly worth a study in their own. There's going to be an ROI white paper that comes out. So looking at cost implications and how to measure that appropriately will be interesting, although it's a little bit challenging in this space. Hal Varian at Google, he's an economist at Google, and he's had some really, really relevant thoughts. I would encourage people to look there, because the way we've traditionally measured productivity in jobs and in the workforce isn't necessarily applicable to the way we do technology now. And so Hal Varian has been doing some really, really great work here that's really, really thoughtful and insightful. So digging into that may be interesting. Also, looking at quality. So far we've been talking, so we touch on it this year, and it's really difficult to measure because essentially quality is a subjective measure. Quality is what a person thinks. And so this year we touched on it in terms of rework, right? So how much rework do you have to do? How many failures do you have? But I would really like to continue digging into how technical practices and culture and those lean types of practices impact not just throughput and stability, but also quality. And so I'd like to see if we can find good ways of measuring that as well.
Oh, fantastic. So again, thank you very much. So anybody who's watching this, you'll be able to see the links at the bottom of the page for not only the State of DevOps 2016 report, but the other resources Nicole mentioned. Again, Nicole, thank you very much for your time. And thank you, everybody, for watching this podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.